Welcome to another episode of Phrasally Verbocious. Today we're going to talk about classroom discipline and how you manage your classes. So Chris, this is something as a teacher trainer you get asked quite a bit. What would your first impressions of classroom discipline be?
Something that stuck with me, a couple of things that stuck with me from the very beginning. And one of them is something that I keep hearing and I keep repeating, so I suppose I'm contributing to the echo chamber, but what you permit, you promote. And in other words, whatever you allow to take place in your classroom, you're allowing to take place in your classroom, quite obviously. And you're kind of subtly indicating to your students, now however old they are, this applies to adults as well as to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, that's okay. And a classic example of this, I was asked to observe a lesson about 2 years ago now, and the teacher sort of said, I need a bit of support here with behaviour. I don't know really what I can do. The students just aren't responding. And I went in. I'll be quite honest that within about 5 minutes, I knew exactly what the problem was and could have left then. And the instance was that the teacher had asked the students to form a line at the whiteboard and basically take it in turns to, I think it was write something on this board or fill something. I can't quite remember the activity. But the point was the students arranged themselves in what I would refer to as a potato near the board, as opposed to a line. And the teacher just handed the pen and chaos ensued. In other words, he asked for a line, he got a potato, and that was accepted. So it was promoted. Oh, okay, I asked for a line, you can give me a potato, no problem. And I think if you don't insist on what you want from the start, regardless of the age of the students, regardless of the level of the students, you're lost.
Yeah, I think it's quite important that everybody in the room knows what's expected pretty early on. Not to be like a disciplinarian or something. It's just
not at all.
To show each other where you can have a bit of give and take, and then
exactly.
I was looking in the learning teaching book this week actually, and Scrivener actually states you're creating conditions in which learning can take place.
Right.
And I had a discussion the other day actually with another teacher, whereas teaching's one of those strange things where you can do it 400 different ways, but there needs to be a minimum level of quality. So for example, even we've done dual teaching before, we've shared classes. Yeah. You and me teach completely differently, completely differently. Yeah. But we still have we're both from a demand high. I'm talking about Scrivener again. We're from a demand high teaching sort of background, and that's what we expect and give. But we have two completely different methods of doing it, which is perfectly fine because
it's perfectly fine. And
we have an endpoint.
About minimum standards, it's also about those expectations and about what the students are going to do in terms of their behaviour as well as their language production in class. And you're right, it's not about being a disciplinarian. It's simply that if I have asked my 9-year-olds to arrange their chairs in a circle, well, I'm not going to do the activity until they're in a circle. It's not about shouting, and I know you want to talk about shouting as well, but it's not about shouting. It's just about, guys, this isn't a circle.
Yeah.
Now we have a circle. Thank you. Now we can move on.
Yeah. I think it's quite important to have, if you ask for something, you get it in return. Whereas, like you said, if you just go, sure, that's grand, then how far are they going to push you, or how far is anybody going to push you? It could be a 5-year-old, it could be a 55-year-old.
It's just about establishing boundaries and knowing, okay, so in here we do it like this.
I think the most important thing is in that room. I always say when people cross the threshold of the door, you've walked into my room, and you could be 95, you could be 5, but I'm still, this is my room and it's still my rules.
Absolutely. Yeah. Are you a shouter?
I'm very loud, but that's just because I am what's called a culture. I am very every time we go to edit this podcast, I have to turn me down because I am 97 decibels, far too loud for any form of microphone. No, I'm not. All right, fair enough. When I first started, because I worked in Islamic centres and refugee centres and with refugees. Obviously, there was never going to be any shouting because there was no classroom discipline or anything, and you would never take away the security of the student there. Right. But no, even in private academies, even with, say, disruptive teenagers or kids, I think if you shout, you've lost the room completely.
I totally agree. When I trained, and this was for UK high school inner city teaching. When I was trained for that, I was told right on day one, you have to be angry when you're not, and not angry when you are, because otherwise you've lost control, and you can't lose control because you're the teacher. So, whilst I wouldn't necessarily shout, I would never shout when I was angry.
I mean, I shout if I'm acting, for certain reasons. I'm right. Loud, but it's never at someone, and it's never to someone. It's it's never sit down. I might just shout because we're playing a game and it is loud. There's a difference between raising your voice and raising your voice at someone.
Absolutely.
But no, to shout at a student, I think one of the number one rules. It's such an obvious rule in teaching. I don't think it actually gets talked about that much. But I think the number one rule in any classroom is security. And if you take security away from a student, you've lost them for good.
I think that's a good moment to move to the talking point of relationships and how relationships in the classroom work, and how, I think I was saying earlier on, figuring out boundaries is key to any relationship. Work relationships, romantic relationships, family relationships, working out what you can and can't say to people, how you do things, how you behave in certain contexts. And I think it's the same here, and getting to know your students.
Yeah, it's
what makes them tick. What are their, to misuse a buzzword? What are their triggers? What is it that's going to actually annoy your students? Don't do it. What is it going to? What do they find fun? Do a bit more of it, but not too much.
I think that's one of those things I always say when you're getting to know your students in that first 2 weeks. If you're like me and you have that little notepad of say 3 lines in your notepad that no student ever sees, and you're making notes on them, you're finding out their likes, dislikes, interests, what makes them tick, stuff like that. Once you get that rapport with students, it's just so much easier. But I mean, some people, especially like young teens, will put up almost more of a metaphorical wall in the classroom, which is fair enough, because I mean, if you're in the private sector like we are, they've been in school all day, completely different mindset. Then maybe do a sport, then come to your class. So they may have this sort of wall in front of this teacher, but that's fine because you work with that and you do something about it.
I think regardless of whether they're young people or old people, if we're working in the private sector and they're coming to class in the evening, they've had a day already.
Yeah.
It might be at work, it might be at school. Who knows what's happened? And I think even kids even if you're teaching in a normal school, quote unquote normal school, so during the daytime, our kids are coming to us with baggage. Just again, like any other relationship, the kids are coming to us with baggage. They're coming to us with experiences and knowledge. And things that have gone wrong or right in their day. So sometimes you get a young kid come bouncing into your class, and actually it can be the most disruptive thing, even though what they're bringing with them is joy.
Yeah.
I've got a kid actually who does this quite regularly, and they're just a really happy kid. And they come bouncing into my classroom, and there's just chaos in their wake. But none of it's malintended, none of it's malicious. It's just they're enthusiastic and they're actually really happy to be in my class. Yeah. They just come from something that's made them really joyful or whatever it might be. But it can be the other way around. They could have had a really difficult day. They could have got a 3 for a maths test they studied for. They had an argument with their boyfriend/girlfriend. Mum's annoyed at them they didn't do the washing up.
Yeah,
and then you say, here we go, get your homework out. And of course they've left it at home.
Yeah, that's why I'm always very easy on stuff like that, because life goes on. Nobody's going to die in the next 90 minutes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that goes well into our next sort of point on the discussion, which will get an entire podcast in the very near future, because one of us is presenting it at a conference in the extremely near future, possibly more conferences as well. But I think emotional intelligence in the classroom goes a long way to controlling a class as well, in a way that I wouldn't call it discipline anymore. It's just classroom structure and routines and setups.
You see, actually, if I could just cut in, classroom management is what we used to call it when I was doing my original training, and I quite like that term.
Yeah, because when everything's positive, you're still managing the positivity.
Absolutely.
Or whenever there's a conversation, you're still managing it. But I think I will do a whole big spiel on this in a different podcast, but getting students to understand themselves, not just at the English language level, but on a human emotional level, is actually quite a big way of helping them. Because how can you feel better if you don't know how you feel right now? You know,
how are you? I'm fine, thank you, and you.
Yeah, getting them out of that. But we'll talk about it in a different podcast, where it's like there are 300 ways of helping yourself. But what I or helping them. But what I found works really well is if you get students to grade themselves. Like you don't grade anybody, but they grade themselves at the end of class. So I find it especially effective if you have, say, a poster per class you have on the wall. So it's permanently public. Everyone can walk in and see it. So for the young learners, I have point systems that carry on the whole way through the class. So you split the classroom in half. Left-hand side, team 1. Right-hand side, team 2. Number the teams. Never let them decide. Learned that the hard way. So by the end of the class, teacher has complete decision on who gets points for what and why. But at the end of the class, no, you can't make it that, say, one team has 500 points and one team has 2. Because then the other team will just go, well, what's the point? We've lost this one.
Yeah.
So what I actually have is a rule. Okay, so the winning team, everybody gets 1 point that goes on the poster on the wall at the side of the room. But to keep the other team motivated, even if they are losing by 20 points or whatever, I have this rule where it's the best behaved person from the other team still gets a point. So you're always giving everybody a chance to redeem themselves and improve anyway, which works really. It works for me. It might not work for everybody else, but I've sort of had this system in place for maybe 5 years now, and it just works perfectly.
I think what you just said then is really important as well. It might not work for everybody, but it works for me. And I think experimenting with what works with you in your classes is really important. And finding out, again, it's like relationships and knowing your students, but knowing your students as a group and also knowing yourself. Like there are things that I just don't do and that other people swear by. Yeah. We used to work together somewhere where stickers were the currency of the building. And they would keep appearing on my desk because they would be supplied by our employer, and these stickers would keep appearing. And I think, what am I going to do with these stickers? I just don't use them.
I used to take them off you, actually, didn't I?
but then I did it differently. That actually they were really popular with my teenagers, and I'd give one every 3 weeks to a teenager, about once a fortnight to an adult. And with
university students, they were like catnip for university students.
But then for me, when I did give them out to the littler ones, they really did have currency and value, but they were not something that I used as a general kind of, oh, you've been good, have a sticker, whereas other teachers did. And that works for them. But it doesn't mean that my way is wrong or their way is wrong, just that we function differently. I'm also I really don't like points. You swear by it. I really don't like points. It doesn't make your system wrong or my way wrong either. So a student is acting up, Alan. Let's say a good student or a middle of the road student acting up. What's your or acting out of character? What's your approach?
Ooh, acting out of character. A middle of the road student. I would always want to be a middle of the road student in high school. I was the middle. That's the anonymous student, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
What class? What level?
I don't think that really matters.
I think it does, because we'd mentioned. I do the point systems for young learners, which carry on the whole year, but for teens, on the wall, I have the students grading themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, the teens will have their names on the side, and instead of points, it'll be every class listed, and they grade themselves. So they give themselves a grade. How do you think you did today?
Okay, let's say it's a teenager acting out a character then.
I would ask them what they would like to see on the poster at the end of the class, and why do you think it would be that? And then so say maybe they say something, or maybe they swear, because I mean everybody swears. I'm like, well, that's going to mark you down a grade on the report. He's like, oh, right, okay. What do you want the report to be at the end of class? And how do you think you're going to improve that? And then I like to do the thing of how do you think what you've just done makes me feel? But then you point to the two people either side of them. How do you think it makes him feel? How do you think it makes her feel? Okay. And then there's sort of that shared empathy, sort of learning point where it's
that's what I was getting at with the level, kind of okay, we do it in different ways, but I think those basic kind of, okay, how is this making us feel? Like how are you feeling? What's making this happen? But also, how is this affecting the rest of us? Like, you can do that at different levels, in different ways. Exactly.
But it's like the way you were saying that you don't use a point system, whereas for young learners, I swear by a point system. Have you ever used classroom contract?
Again, another thing that I absolutely loathe.
Yeah. See, I go to all these conferences, and you always get someone who mentions a classroom contract. So I tried and tested this 1 year with the probably would have been with 10-year-olds, and then I tried it with a teen class, and then I used my normal methods with the rest of it. And I give it the benefit of the doubt for so long, but I couldn't. I got them to write up the rules, kind of like as a poster in the first day, and then everybody goes around. See, because it's written down, and because then they sign it and they draw a picture or something, it just seemed too formal and boring. And I've given it the benefit of the doubt, but it just never worked for me.
Exactly, and this is a part of it as well. I think sometimes you thinking your attitude towards an activity or a routine or something is part of the sales pitch. So if you don't buy it and I don't buy it, I'm not going to sell it to my students, so they're not going to buy it either. So if you really think classroom contracts work and you're enthusiastic about them, you can sell them to your students.
Well, I think it's quite easy to, like I always say, you put the caricature of yourself in the classroom. So I think when you're doing it in front of the 10 people that's there, I think it's quite easy to sell it. I just think you're more cynical, maybe before class. Maybe that's the prejudice.
I disagree entirely, because I also think it's to do with the way that your attitude is throughout your actual attitude. And I'm not going to sustain for an entire year the charade that I think the contract that I've put on the wall is worthwhile. Okay. Because it doesn't work. It doesn't work for me, so I can't maintain that. And I know for me, the idea of like 9-year-olds don't know what a contract is. Yeah. they've never signed one. Yeah. Outside of an English lesson. So why do we think it's going to magically change their behavior if they've signed a contract? I don't know. I mean, again, if it works for you, why not do it? Yeah. Okay. There's quite a lot of relationships there. Should we talk about pace and routines?
Yeah, I think especially with young learners, once you get routines into them, like from September, it's very easy for the rest of the year. If they know what's coming next and they know what to do, including clean up the classroom after, say, posters are colouring in, and then maybe we do the song, maybe we do, my very young learners always love to play River at the end of class. They knew it was coming. So you would actually get them to design the rules for each week. So, on one side of the river, it's animals and clothing. The other side is sport and school subjects. So you get them to pick it. So then again, they feel more involved. So they're more part of the event, as it were.
Yeah, they're owning it. And when you've got routines in place, the class moves more quickly. It's more dynamic. And therefore it's more interesting. I think that's very important. I do think that, having said routines are important, I think shaking it up for interest is important as well. Yeah.
Because you don't want a student sitting there going, oh, here we go, we're going to do the thing again. It's like, no.
I do remember from my days when I was teaching in UK high schools, a student being delighted that their teacher was not in that day. And why? X is an excellent teacher. Why? What's the issue? Oh, no. It's just that every lesson is the same. We know what the next thing is going to be. It's never interesting. It's not bad, and we learn stuff, but the entire structure of the lesson is identical every single lesson.
I think that's quite apparent when it comes to the difference between teens and young learners, whereas the human ability to do pattern recognition is really important for young learners, because then they're working out their routines, and it's a safety net, whereas it's a warning sign with teens that, oh, this is boring because we're doing the same pattern of things again.
And I think that's another reason why I would always say you must experiment, and you must remember that classes are different, and you do what works for you and your students at that time. And when it stops working, move on. Yeah. You haven't made a mistake. It's just that it's not working at the moment. That's the problem.
I think for this podcast, I had a good old look at the book that everyone's read, Scrivener's Learning Teaching, and he has quite a good. It's just a simple sentence. He has a whole chapter on it where he talks about the entire classroom management comes from attitudes, intentions, personality, and relationships with students. But you also have to be aware of classroom setup, who sits around who, and be willing to change the seating plan and be comfortable with mixing it up, which goes for your routines as well as even down to things like seating plans. As you know, there were certain academies I've worked in, I could move the seats around anywhere, whereas some academies, it was 2 static tables that 5 people sat at once. So sometimes they can be a bit more difficult to fiddle with, but seating plans can make a major difference in the class as well.
They can. Moving them around is important. In fact, I was at an event on the weekend where Andrea Littlewood from IH Madrid was talking about primary kids and the routine of we move in this classroom. So it doesn't matter where you sit when you come in. I don't know whether she uses seating plans or not, but the idea of where you sit when you come in is no relevance, because at some point you're going to get up and you're going to move. You're going to change talk partners and you're going to talk to somebody else. And I think that's an important element of this as well. Because obviously we're teaching communication, so they need to be talking. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that the older we get, the more we get territorial. And so although I do make my adults move, because they do tend to sit in the same chairs, and I'm not going to seating plan a room of adults. But at the same time, I will get them, okay, every other person move 1 gap to your right or your left, or go and sit with somebody you haven't sat with, for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And that's something you have to gently do with them. Because we are the same. We have our people have their mug in the teacher's room, or whatever it is. We get very territorial as we get older. And it's important not to let that get in the way of making them practice their communication with different pairs as well.
Yeah. I had a rule this year with an exam class. I had my B2s came twice a week, but then if they went into the exam class on a Friday, because the exam class was the exam was going to be in a different examination centre, they had to sit on a different seat than what they would in my normal classes, just to sort of get them out of that comfort zone of it's not Monday night anymore, it's not a weekday night, it's Friday afternoon, and this is different. Let's get that into our minds.
I wish I had downloaded the paper when I read it, and I didn't read it online, because I remember from a very long time ago reading a piece of research about how if students sit in the same chair for a year and then they go and do their exam in a different room, they do worse than if they sit in different seats.
Yeah, I remember I was talking about this before. Yeah, that was the reason as to why I made them sit in different places. Yeah.
Yeah, there's all sorts of spatial triggers that go on. Oh, I'm in this seat, I know what's going on, I can remember what I learned when I sat here.
But you're doing the exam in a different building. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And depending on where you're learning, possibly in a different town.
Exactly.
To get a different building, like there might actually be a journey involved. Sorry, go on.
As we were talking about young learners and teens there, just one extra bit of advice that I picked up on was the after-class chat. Normally in a school, if you say to a student, could you stay behind and give me 2 minutes after class, everybody goes, ooh, you've done something. But take that fear away from people. So what you could do is introduce at the start of the year, say you take, I started doing it last year and I did it with 3 students after each class, whereas I made sure I made notes on who it was and what I said to them. So it was 3 students per class for young learners and teens, and I just give them feedback. It was never disciplining. It was feedback on, here's something you said, thought that was really good, well done, or, good job on that exercise, you were first finished, you nailed it, good job, or you give me, without even realizing, 3 phrasal verbs, whatever. But it was just feedback, so it made it comfortable. I took this from a fantastically large book from Pavilion Publishing, which is really, really good, is Understanding Teenagers in the ELT Classroom. So Chris Roland got an Elton nomination for this. Really, really good and easy to read, teaching teens, because he basically took case studies of himself, just going, okay, this class is an absolute disaster. What do I do? And here's some of the ideas. I think it's about 24 chapters in it, maybe even more. 23, 24. And it's just a really, really strong book for a lot of good ideas. So I took that idea of after class chats from it. So everybody gets one. Say if you do 3 a class, you've 10 students, so maybe once every 2 weeks or something, you speak to everybody. So you take that fear of the after class talk away, and they all know, like you tell them in your first class, I might be doing this. Don't worry, nothing bad. So it's it's actually a really easy way of getting to talk to individuals, which sometimes we don't get to do. Like I learned last year, I had 2 students who would always come in really early. So I got to know them so much better. And then, it happens all the time in Spain when people go away on, trips for a week or so. So maybe you only have 2 or 3 people in a classroom. In a really weird way, that last year those trips were spaced over like 3 weeks and everybody went on them. So at different periods, I only had 2 or 3 in the room, and I got to know that class really, really well. And it was a blessing in disguise, because it was just, I knew these humans that I wouldn't normally get to spend this time with. And it was really, really productive.
So just before we wrap up then, I'm just looking at our notes, and this particular line amuses me. If you would like to, could you please go to page... clear instructions. Yeah,
because it's the amount of waffle that you can cut out. I think this is more for people who are newly qualified English teachers rather than the experienced ones, because we know how to talk to. I don't mean how to talk to people, but how to give instruction.
So to novice teachers,
well, you do get that thing where, especially and it is generally British teachers will be too polite about getting people to do things.
Yeah, of course.
So instead of okay, page 6, first team, go. That would be young learners. Whereas you do get some teachers who would go, okay, well, if you would like to, please, could you please go to page 94 if you don't mind? That doesn't help anybody.
please, thank you, and sorry. And by the time they figured out when they've passed the sentence, you've lost the room.
20 minutes passed.
Yeah, I think giving clear instructions. So in other words, what you're doing as well is you're removing doubt. You're giving them security, and I think perhaps this is kind of another mantra here, like remove doubt, provide security, and also what you're doing then subtly is also removing an excuse.
Yeah.
Did you not know what you were doing? Oh no, well I did. Yes. Okay then. What's the issue? Talk to me about the issue.
It's the clarity and removing doubt is the big one. The removing
if students
doubt
feel secure,
so
and
obvious.
the majority of students, want to get on. Most want to behave. They want to get on, but they might need to be shown the way.
Yeah. And
you do that with your routines. You do that with your boundaries. You do that with clarity of instructions, but also of expectations, and that you maintain them. If one day, I quite like it actually. There are occasions when I will forget, because I'm human, to put the date at the beginning of my class. And I'll go straight into an activity with my 9-year-olds to be like, Chris. Oh, sorry. Chris. Yes. It's Monday. Yes. But we didn't. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Here's the date. And we do our date routine.
Mhm.
And then they go, okay, now we're ready to start. No, they're ready to start because they put the date on the board.
Yeah.
But that when you've got that, they know where they are. They know what happens. Does it mean they don't play up? Of course they play up. They're humans.
Yeah, the kids, the people. I mean, I do. You know, since I'm back in Ireland, I'm doing Irish classes and I'm doing Spanish classes, and like we're all adults. We still have a bit of crack, like.
Right. So yeah,
That's the Irish word crack, by the way. Just
yeah. So yeah, I mean, for me, if I'm going to summarize what I've learned in a decade in the classroom, what you permit, you promote, and firm, fair, clear, consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Does it for me?
I think the best way to end the podcast is possibly one of the best job interview questions I was ever asked a long time ago. Was
yes.
thinking about the atmosphere in your classroom. And then I was asked the question, if I walked into your classroom, what sort of feeling would I get from everybody there?
Yeah.
And think about how you would want yours and how to go about getting that.
Yes.
Superb interview question. And I think it's a question everybody needs to think about. There's no right or wrong answer. Yeah.
Oh, no, of course. Well,
okay, there's a wrong answer.
Miserable. Yeah, but like everything else in that, I think in teaching, there is a multiplicity of right answers.
Yeah. But it's even one of those things where it would be quite easy for someone to say, seeing someone throw something. Well, no, I'm playing snowball fight. It's a vocabulary lesson.
Exactly. Thank you for listening to another episode of Phrasally Verbocious. If you'd like to get in touch, you can tweet us
at Phrasally V on Twitter.
You can email us
phrasallyverbocious@gmail.com.
You can check out our show notes online at
phrasallyverbociouspodcast.blogspot.com.
And please like, review and comment us on your podcast subscription service of choice. Goodbye.
Goodbye.